So this entire video sequence was created using stills. Now, the reason why I choose to use stills over just recording video is mainly for resolution. By taking stills, I'm getting 30, 40, 50 megapixel files. And then when I throw those into Premiere, I have a lot of room to be able to zoom in, zoom out, rotate, do all of these things. Whereas even if I was recording with 4K, I can only punch in so much before the details and the quality starts to degrade. So by using stills, I'm able to mitigate that, and I have all the flexibility in the world to be able to do what I want to do. Now, of course, as you can see, this is a bit of a laborious task because, I have to take a picture, rotate the rig slightly, take a picture. And of course, the more pictures you take, the smoother you're going to be able to do the rotation. So in the video at the beginning of this video, that was a combination of 72 stills. So it took me 72 frames to work my way around the entire rig. And I was very happy with how smooth that was. But if I was to double that up, I would be able to make it even smoother. Of course, if I would have had less frames, it would have been a little bit more choppy. So when you're doing this method, there's some things that you really need to make sure you keep in mind. Now, number one, you obviously need to have whatever it is you're shooting on a very stable platform. Because as you're rotating, if it shifts, changes position, changes height, any of those things in any way, then of course your rotation isn't going to line up very well. So you need to have something very sturdy that's not going to shift, move, vibrate, anything. So I use my heavy duty tripod, my Benro tripod, and then I have a 3-way Manfrotto tripod head on top. So both of those allow the camera rig, it's a pretty heavy rig. That rig is almost 10 pounds. It allowed that to stay stable. Didn't have to worry about it. Of course, as I'm touching the rig, I'm, touching it very gently. So that way, it doesn't slide on my floor because I've got hardwood floors. But you want something that's going to be sturdy. So you can use a tripod, you could use a table, you could use a stand, whatever you're going to use. It needs to be something that as you're rotating, whatever it is you're shooting, it stays where it needs to stay. Now, speaking of rotation, you need a way to rotate whatever you're shooting consistently throughout the entire rotation. So with my tripod head, it has markings on it, degree markings for when you rotate the tripod head. So I was able to use those markings to move the rig the same amount of distance every single time. So if you don't have something like that, you'll want to create something. You can print out a circular document that has markings on it, or you can create your own, or you can just move it by eye. Whatever method you choose, it just needs to be something where you can move it consistently. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect every single time. You're not going to be able to see that small of a difference, but it needs to be consistent enough to where you're not moving a little bit one time and then double the next time, and then you'll see that as you're rotating. So whatever you choose to do, just make sure that you're rotating it the same amount of distance throughout the entire rotation. Now, another thing you have to pay close attention to is your lighting, and not just when you start, but you need to make sure that whatever lighting you have set up, that it's going to work and be consistent throughout the entire rotation. So you really need to rotate whatever you're shooting 360 degrees and look at how the light is falling on it and make sure that you like the light that you're getting. Because what you don't want to do is be adjusting the light as you're rotating, because you're going to be able to see that when you put it together. Now, that could be a cool effect. It definitely could be a cool effect, which I actually considered doing to kind of make it look like there was kind of like some moving lights in the scene. So that definitely, if that's what you're going for, you certainly can do that. And I do think that it would work out well. But if you're kind of just trying to have just a consistent rotation, you want to make sure that your light is good all the way around. So if at any position you're not liking the way that the light is falling on whatever you're shooting, adjust the light and then check 360 degrees again, make sure it's all good. You also want to be aware of any ambient light and how that's impacting whatever you're shooting. So for me, because I shot it during the day and there was a big window camera right, it was causing the light to be really flat because I had my continuous light camera left. So to mitigate that, I flagged out the ambient light, the window light, So that way I could get some darker shadows on the right side, and it just added a little bit more contrast and punch. I didn't want the product to be flat. I didn't necessarily want it to be overly moody either. I wanted you to be able to see the detail. So it was a nice meet in the middle to just flag that window light, to just add just a little bit of contrast on the right side, have my light on the left side, and it worked out really well. Now, of course, once you've taken all of your images, it's just a matter of bringing them into your software and essentially just creating a video file, which if you think about a video, it is essentially just a bunch of stills that are put together. That really is what video is. And so you're not doing much of anything different than what happens when you do video. You're just doing it all manually and you just have more resolution. So I used Premiere. So I took all of the stills, dropped them into the timeline, and I had them all set to be 2 frames a piece. Now, of course, you can adjust that to be whatever you want. You can set it to 1 frame. You can set it to 3 or 4 frames. Of course, the longer you make each frame, the slower your rotation, but if you make it too long, it's going to get a little bit choppy because you're going to have, you know, you're going to be able to see each click of the rotation essentially. So if you want it kind of seamless, you really need to stay somewhere between 1, probably 3 frames. It'd probably be the most you would want to go, depending upon how many stills you have to be able to make the rotation. So then once you have it in there, now you're just dealing with video, and you could do everything that you typically do with video. Now, once I had everything the way that I wanted it to be for a particular piece, I then nested it. So then that way I can easily add effects and all of those things without having to drop the effects into each one of the clips. Of course, I could use adjustment layers, which I do, but sometimes depending upon what I'm doing it in an adjustment layer has a different impact on it than actually putting it on the clip. So it's just easier to nest it. But what you definitely want to be careful of when you nest it is that once you nest those together, you've created that video file, and any effects or anything that you do to that nested clip is working off of that file, those pixels. So you lose the ability to be able to zoom in, zoom out with all of that resolution. It's kind of like when you are in Photoshop and then you create a JPEG. Once you have that JPEG, the size is the size. So now if you zoom in, you're basically just stretching those pixels. So before you nest it, you want to make sure that you've done all of your zooming and all of those things and all of your effects, so that way you can actually work with the resolution of the file. Now, I will say it is a bit cumbersome, you know, when you're doing your zoom in, zoom outs, and you're literally working on a 2-frame image each time and you're having to adjust each one. It does take some time, but the end result is much better because you have a lot more detail. Now, depending upon how much you're zooming, you may not have to worry about that. You know, if you're only zooming in, you know, 105%, 110%, no one's really going to be able to tell, especially on social media and YouTube. But that is just something to keep in mind. So there you have it. Hopefully that was helpful, and hopefully you enjoyed the video. It was fun to make, and I encourage you to go out and try it. The flexibility is great, and you really can create some really cool effects with this method.